When we're first working with people, teaching them about behavioural science, we often use examples involving children or animals because obviously the behaviours that are involved are much less complex. There's far fewer variables in the environment, so it's much easier to get your head round the link between cause and effect. So what I'm doing as a parent and what the child does versus in the workplace, there are often many more things in motion. So when I'm not experimenting with behaviour with people in a business setting, I like to spend my time riding horses, and I recently had the opportunity where I came across a bunch of people training horses out in Australia. I didn't go to Australia, I might add, unfortunately, who have got really good at using behavioural science to optimise the way in which they train horses. So I set about spending some time with them, really to improve my skills as a horse rider. But those of you that know me already will not be surprised to hear that I spent most of the time with a notebook out, furiously making notes, scribbling things down, thinking about application in business with people. So I wanted to spend some time today with you guys just sharing a few of those things, those insights that occurred to me during that time. So when it comes to managing horses, or people for that matter, I think there are probably two approaches: brains or a bit of muscle power, and that's really what I'm talking about today. So it's not uncommon for people to see, if any of you got kids that take them off to pony club at the weekend, it wouldn't be uncommon to see various scenarios involving lots of pushing and shoving and brute force and a horse probably not doing much or doing lots of random things. And to have the uninformed observer watch and say, oh, but you know, this person over here, they've just got a great horse, it's really easy. This person over here is working incredibly hard, look how much they're doing, they're kind of real strong rider leading that horse. In actual fact, the difference between the two scenarios is the first rider, Charlotte in this case, whether she knows it or not, has done a really good job of getting her horse's responses under stimulus control. So whatever she wants it to do, it does it anytime, anywhere, regardless of other distractions in the environment. So when I use the term stimulus control, if it's new to you, all I'm really talking about is a stimulus in the environment, so it could be something that you see, something that you hear, something that you feel, consistently eliciting some kind of response. So something that we could probably all identify if you've driven over here today, you're driving down the road, there's a traffic light ahead, you see it change to red. Before you've even thought about it, you're already responding consistently, you're putting your foot on the brake down to slow. So that is just an example of something that's stimulus control. And really when it comes to animal training, that's all animal training is. There are a number of responses you want from any animal as a handler, and you want them consistently when you ask for them. Anytime, anywhere, regardless of distractions. If you listen to somebody talking about horse training, the sort of terms that people will use is, we want the horse to be engaged, forward-going, responsive, on the bit, all of these kind of nice labels, as you guys would call it. And all of those things really are outcomes. So the horse responds in a number of different ways, and when you put it together, if it feels good, it feels like it's responsive, or it feels like it's forward-going. But actually, in reality, all of those things are a combination of just 4 basic behaviours. So you're riding a horse, it goes when you ask it stops when you ask it turns its front legs when you ask it, or it turns its back legs when you ask it. If you can get those responses under your control, so a light request and the horse does it, and you put them together, then you can do all kinds of fancy things. So I was pretty embarrassed about the fact that in 25 years, this has never even occurred to me. I never even considered the fact that it was that basic. Pretty frustrated, actually, that nobody had ever told me that. I've never heard anybody talking that language previously. But also really excited, just because actually training a horse to stop, training it to go, training it to turn with its front legs, its back legs, suddenly seems really simple. Could I get good at that? Yeah, I probably could. And suddenly everything that seemed complex about combining that seems really easy. So the only consequence I'm going to talk about today is R-. Principally because when you're training horses, particularly in the early stages, that's the consequence that we use. And I'm not going to make any apologies for that, because actually I think in business, whilst you wouldn't want to rely on R- to get discretionary performance, it's definitely a key component of being able to make things happen. Yet it's probably the most misunderstood consequence. So when I say R-, I want you to imagine now that you go to sit on your chair back in the office and some helpful person has put a pin on the chair, an upturned pin on the chair. So you go to sit down, and you go to sit on the pin. The next thing you do immediately, of course, is you jump up. And that's R-. You do a behaviour because it makes something unpleasant go away. And really, actually, that's all horse training is. We create discomfort using pressure for a horse, using our legs on its side, and using pressure through our hands on the reins and the bit to create discomfort. And that discomfort motivates the horse to do something. And if when it does what we want, we remove the discomfort, the horse learns that the way to make unpleasant pressure go away is to do whatever the response was that you're targeting. So it's the removal of the pressure that counts. So if let's say we've got a naive horse and we're going to train it we want it to walk forwards when we squeeze with our legs. So horses are not born to know that's what they're supposed to do. So if you squeeze with your legs and it's sufficiently uncomfortable, a horse is probably going to try a few things to try and make that pressure go away. And if, when it takes a first step forward, you release pressure, pretty quickly with not much repetition, it's going to learn, okay, when I feel this discomfort, I move forward. So timing of when you release pressure is absolutely critical. So it's really easy to train horses really quickly in this way to do the right thing, but actually it's also easy and probably easier to train them to do the wrong thing by incorrect use of R-. And it's pretty sad. There's a really high wastage rate in terms of horses that get destroyed every year. A lot of them get destroyed because of behavioural problems, which actually just means that they've learned to do behaviours that we find undesirable and they're not under the stimulus control of the handler. So that says something about us as riders, because you can imagine, back to my horse that I'm training to walk forwards again. So I've asked him to go I'm creating pressure using my legs to ask him to move forwards. And I haven't actually thought about what might happen next, so I'm assuming he's going to go forwards. But in this case, he doesn't. He goes backwards. So I might try a bit harder, and suddenly it's going backwards at high speed. It's not a very comfortable position to be in, let me tell you, particularly when there can be all kinds of obstacles behind you. So if you've not thought that that might happen, probably what's going to happen based on behavioural science is you've done a behaviour yourself as a rider, you've got something you do not want, so you're going to stop it pretty quickly. So horse runs backwards, you stop, you remove the pressure. Well, you've just taught that horse the way to remove pressure is to go backwards. And, you know, we've all seen kind of videos of kids on horses doing all kinds of things, bolting, rearing, bucking. All of those things involve incorrect use of R-. When the horse does it, it removes some form of discomfort. So this was incredibly, I don't know whether it was in line, it's probably actually quite depressing for me as a horse rider, but it's really made me think about R- and use of pressure and release of pressure and timing, but thinking about that from a people perspective. Because we've all got experience of the dysfunctional behaviours of others and things that we get frustrated about, but actually, when are we complicit in shaping those behaviours? So if I think about, let's say, I'm completely unaware of R- and my role in it, let's say I attempt to give somebody some feedback, so I'm talking about something that, for whatever reason, they don't want to talk about, they find it uncomfortable, and maybe I get a reaction from them I didn't expect. I haven't sat down and thought through all of the options that might happen and how I might handle that. So maybe I get an emotional response or I get an aggressive response. If I haven't thought through that might happen and what I'm going to do, chances are at that point I'm going to back off. Well, at that point, of course, I've just taught that person the way to make me go away all the discomfort is for them to be aggressive towards me or to react emotionally. And everybody's got a story about a boss who kind of, you know, something bad's happened on the job. He comes out of his office, he shouts and he bawls, and then everybody runs off, scuttles off to make the bad thing go away. It's just another example of R-. So oftentimes, the behaviours that we're frustrated with other people, undesirable responses, are actually just the result of us unwittingly delivering R- because we haven't thought it through from that perspective. So definitely food for thought. So this is all very well and good. Use some pressure to motivate a horse to do something and it'll do what I want and I can release it in the training. It's all very easy. But what do you do if you use some pressure and you don't get any response at all? What's the next step? Well, the next step is you have to be prepared to follow through. You have to have thought through the next step. Because if you use pressure and the horse doesn't respond and you give up, you've just taught it not to respond to you. And there are lots of horses that have been taught that for sure. So we talk about pressure in terms of the level of motivating pressure in like a scale of 1 to 10. So if you thought about a radio knob that you turn the dial up. So you ask a horse to do something, you always start with a light request. So whatever a light cue would be that you're aiming for, because ultimately that's what you want to teach in the long term. I have a gentle reminder or I ask something and it happens. So you always start with that. If you don't get a response, then you have to go to the next level of pressure, and no response from that, the next, and so on. So you might think about a scale of 1 to 10 being 1 being a light request if we're still talking about moving forwards, 1 being a light request with your legs, then you might squeeze a bit harder, then you might give it a few nudges, then the whip might be out and you might be giving it some whip taps, and it might be faster, it might be harder, so whatever 10 looks like. What's critical here is when it comes to training horses, there's something like a 10-second window between cause and effect. If you leave it any longer than 10 seconds, they don't learn because they can't establish cause and effect that far apart. So that's, you've got to be pretty good with your timing. And actually, the best riders would get it down to about 2 seconds for the most optimal training. So 10 seconds is not a long time to go from, please do it, to, okay, I really mean it now. Okay, yeah, I really, really mean it, and all the way through from 1 to 10. So what's critical is finding out for each horse there will be a level of motivating pressure which will get you a response, so it's sufficiently uncomfortable. So it could be, I ask with a 1, and actually this horse, if I don't get a response from a 1, I just need to be really consistent about going to a 3, and it'll soon learn to respond to a 1. For another horse, it may be that you need to go, you ask your 1 or your 2, and you need to go to an 8. But the key learning point for me is for every animal, that window of opportunity is different, and you have to find it. Because if you're asking at a 3 and banging away and nothing's happening, you're teaching it not to respond. But if you go straight to an 8 or a 9 and it's a particularly sensitive animal, what you end up is with something that's too hot. It's spending all of its time, every time you touch it, anticipating something bad's going to happen next, so you get all kinds of wacky avoidance behaviour. And I guess we've probably touched on some of those things previously. So knowing what that window of opportunity is between just enough to get something to happen and not too much that you kind of create this monster that's trying to get away from you all the time is critical. And we often talk a lot about R+ and knowing what people like and that being different for everybody. I actually think it's probably even more important, having gone through this experience, to know what people don't like so that you avoid them just tuning you out, or you avoid making them so hot that they just want to escape you or escape whatever the threat is. So that's been probably the most poignant learning point for me in terms of horses. So you know what you're targeting, you know what consequences you're going to deliver, you're going to be consistent at always asking with a light request, and if you don't get a response, following up with the right level of pressure to get something to happen. If you're consistent with that and you persist, pretty much it starts to feel like the horse is going on its own. So this is where you get into the kind of the land of Olympic dressage. You ask the horse to trot in a straight line, and lo and behold, it trots in a straight line until you ask it to do something different. Which means it's much more pleasant for the horse because it's not getting constantly nagged and poked from a rider. It's much easier as a rider because you're not having to do all the work, it's just going on its own. But it also means, importantly, since the basics are taken care of themselves, you're now in a position to focus on the finer elements which are required for the more complex work, the more complex manoeuvres. But incredibly hard to train in riders, actually not horses. Easy to train in horses, and the way you would train it is, let's say you have a horse that tends to drift left, so you're riding in a straight line and it just tends to go to the left. Every time it takes a step to the left, within that window, so sort of 2 seconds, you consistently ask it to go back to the right. It goes 1 step to the left, you put it back to the right, and then you let go, you release the pressure. Knowing full well that the next thing it's going to do straight away is go back left again. And when it goes back left again, you put it back right, and you let go, and it'll go back left again, and you correct it. It doesn't take that much repetition for the horse to learn, just through that consequence history, to just keep going in a straight line, because every time it goes to the left, you put it back right. However, the hardest thing for a rider to learn is to let go, because most riders, what they will do, without even being aware of it, if you're on a horse that drifts left, you'll hang onto the right rein to stop it going left. And let's say the horse also has a tendency to slow down, so it's a bit like a wind-up toy. You ask it to trot, and it just gradually grinds to a halt. Again, without even knowing it most times, most riders will be giving it a boot every stride. So now you've got a rider that's hanging onto the right rein, it's giving it a boot every stride, and you throw a few more things in, and soon you've got a rider that's probably doing a lot more work than the horse itself. And that's the problem. So the way to fix it is you've got to let go. But in order to do that, you've got to be prepared to let the horse make a mistake, because making a mistake and you correcting it is the only way it will learn. If you don't let it make mistakes, there's no learning, and you just maintain the status quo. So this is something that is definitely not unique to horse riders. Because I guess most people in the audience would be able to identify if you've got kids. The conflict between not wanting them to make mistakes today, but allowing them to learn so that they make correct decisions in future. And in the workplace, not wanting your staff to make mistakes today versus wanting them to learn and develop so that they can do the right thing tomorrow. So I guess this is the heart of micromanagement, when you prioritise avoidance of making mistakes today over developing your staff. So probably something we could all identify with. So if it feels like this, then unfortunately this is what it is. That's what it is. So any animal trainer will tell you it's never the animal's fault. Somebody not sat too far from here said recently something along the lines of that success in business is predicated on being relentless in the pursuit of just a handful of really simple behaviours. So what has this taught me about horses, but also about people? The best horse riders, whether they know it or not, are really clear on that handful of simple basics that they're targeting, and they do not do anything remotely more sophisticated till the basics are in place. And actually, even when they're working at a much higher level, they spend most of the time just checking that the basics are still in place and refining them, tuning them back up again. And of course, the best leaders also know what the basics are that they want, and they're relentless in their pursuit of the basics, and they don't do anything more complex until those basics are established. And even then, they're still checking and fine-tuning the basics. So my question for you guys today is, do you know what the basics are for your people? What are that handful of responses that you want anytime, anywhere from your people? But also, are you being relentless in your pursuit of creating an environment where that's what you're getting day in, day out? So that's what I'll leave you with to ponder on the way home tonight. Thank you very much.